Arla Perik Beis Mishnah Aleph. Hatrumo Trumas Meiser Shal Demai Hachalav Abikurim Oilim Be'echad Umeya Umitzdarfim Zehem Zev Tzarech Lahar. So this parak is going to discuss mainly the halachas of Bittul Beroiv that apply to Arla, Kilei Kerem, and Truma, and the meat of Karbanos. So certain Isurim that become mixed with Dvarim Hamutarim become Batul Beroiv. For example, if something that's Asr falls into 2 times that amount, and we can't tell which one is the davar ha'asr, all 3 may be used because the thing that was asr became batal. It loses its status of isser through the mixture with a larger number of permitted items. The situation gets more complicated when it comes to food mixtures because the prohibited food adds its forbidden flavor to the mixture as a whole. It's known as tam ke'ikr. The flavor is like the main part of the food. Therefore, food mixtures require more than a simple majority to be mevatel the food that's usher in them. There must be so much more dvarim hamutarim that when someone eating this mix, he wouldn't taste the flavor of the davar ha'asr. How would you taste it if there's davar ha'asr in here? It's a safek isser, you're not allowed to eat that. So the Gemara Chulun tells us that what you could do is you could be seimech. The Gemara gives 3 eitzes. One of them is that you give it to kveila armo, you give it to a goyish cook, or you could just assume. That was 2 out of the 3 terutzim that the Gemara gives how you could eat it. When this cannot be determined, it would generally require 60 times more. It needs to be batul b'shishim in order to be matir, since most flavors cannot be detected in these portions. When the davar ha'asr and the davar ha'mutar are the same kind, if it's min b'minoi, for example, you have kosher meat with non-kosher meat of the same kind, the taste of the meat that's not kosher can never be detected. Nevertheless, 60 times more of davar hamutar is needed to be mevatel the davar ha'asr. When the 2 foods are not the same, min b'she'enoi minoi, for example, if you have bacon mixed with kosher meat, and there's someone who can taste it and determine whether the flavor of the non-kosher food is detectable in the mixture. For example, like we said before, the Gemara Chulun says there's a non-Jewish chef who can taste it and tell us, then the mixture can be mutter even with less than 60. If he tells us that there's no taste in the non-kosher food in the mixture, so then meaning the mixture can be permitted even with less than shishim if he tells us that there's no tam there. However, it's the minig of Bnei Ashkenaz not to rely on the opinion of a goyish taster, as is mavur in Yeridei Sim Tzadik Ches. This is the rule for foods that were blended together or cooked together, lach b'lach. Now, halacha for pieces that simply got mixed together but did not have any flavor to each other, yavesh b'yavesh, is somewhat different. They still need to be batal b'shishim when they are of different kinds, but only a simple majority when they are of the same kind. So it's going to be complicated. There's a lot of different pieces over here that we have to keep cheshbon of. So the first Mishnah teaches that there's certain kinds of kachim and isurim that will not become batal in a simple majority, in a simple bittul b'roiv, or even batal b'shishim. So we have trumas meiser, shel demai, v'achalav, v'abikurim, oilim be'echad umeya. All these things become batal be'echad umeya in a mixture of 101 parts. Meaning that you have a mixture containing one part of these not kachim, but these zachen that have a status higher than regular chulin, together with 100 parts of ordinary food of chulin. So it takes 100 parts of chulin to be mevatel 1 part of truma or any of these other holy foods. When they become nullified, the mixture may be eaten by anyone, even someone who's not a kohen. So we know what truma is, and why are we dafka talking about trumas meiser of the mai? So we're talking about why we're talking about trumas meiser shel demai. So we're going to explain like this: truma is the crop that's grown in Eretz Yisrael has to be given to a kohen. Trumas meiser is the portion that's separated by a levi from the meiser rishon. He receives from the crop and gives it to a kohen. It's probably coming to be trumas meiser of demai is a portion separated from meiser of demai and given to a kohen. The meiser produce of an am haaretz. When Chacham saw that not all am haaretz separated meisers, there were guards that any produce bought from am haaretz you must take off meiser, even if he claims he already did so. The hilchis bittul over here that the Mishnah is going to talk about is zikr applies to trumas meiser, regular trumas meiser, but it's more of a chiddush to say that even trumas meiser shel demai, which in and of itself is only the rabbanon. So that's a chiddush over here, because trumas meiser shel demai is only on the din the rabbanon. V'aval pika, the Mishnah still says that it has this din that it's batul, it's oila be'echad umeya. So all these things, trumas meiser shel demai, chala bikurim, oilim be'echad umeya, umitzdarfen zem zeh. and they combine with one another to aser the mixture into which they fell. If two or more of these types of kodesh falls into a davar hamutter, they combine to aser the mixture to non-kahanim unless there's 100 times as much food of dvarim hamutarim as all the kodesh combined. V'tzarech laharim. So, for example, if one part truma and one part challah falls into 100 parts of chulin, the mixture is aser to non-kahanim unless the 200 parts of chulin, mean 100 times 2, to be mevatalit. These foods combine, even according to those who say that different isurim do not ordinarily combine to make a mixture. Since these are all considered truma min ha-Torah, we treat them all as one large measure of truma. Because truma challah, the zecha, we say that they both have a din of truma. B'tzarech laharim, this saw shenafla v'lazes esel kain. You need to take out a saw that fell into this taruvis and give that part to the kain. V'ashar mutar lazarim, and the rest is going to be mutar to non-kahanim. But even in a case where they became batal, he still must remove the mixture from the amount of kodesh that fell in and became batal, and he must give it to a kain. Since truma, trumas ma'aser, chal, and bikurim belong to the shevet hakahuna, it's a matnas kahuna, so keeping that part that became batal would be like stealing from the kahanim. For example, if a saw of truma, trumas ma'aser, chal, or bikurim fell into 100 saw of chulin, they become batal, and the mixture can be eaten by anybody, but a saw must still be given to a kain because there's a problem of being being geisel the kain, so you have to give it back to belongs to the shevet, it doesn't belong to you. The same way that we spoke about truma, bikurim, trumas meiser, and chalo, that they were oila be'echad u'meya, so too Arla and Kilei HaKarim become batal in a mixture of 201. I mean, you need 200 times the amount in order to be mevatal. And it's darfen zemzem, and it's much stronger. And they combine with each other to asa the mixture into which they fell. If both Arla and Kilei HaKarim fall into a taruvis of something that's mutter, the mixture may not be eaten unless there's 200 times as much permitted food as the two of them together. According to this Tana, Arla and Kilei HaKarim combine to asa a mixture even though there are different isurim. This is true of all kinds of mixtures, whether it's lach or whether it's yavesh, except in a case where they were cooked together with davar hamutter of a different min. This will be explained further at the end of the Mishnah. The Mishnah speaks of a case where Arla and Kilei HaKarim fell into the food together. If one fell in first and then another one fell in, then we'll see in Mishnah Gimel how exactly this is going to work. Ve'ein tzarich laharim, and in a case where they do become batal, he doesn't need to remove anything from the mixture, since there's no monetary claim to them at all, since there's no requirement to give Arla or Kilei HaKarim to anybody, they're just isurim, so there's no question of gzeil over here, as there is by truma, bikurim, chala, and trumas meiser. Reb Shimon says that Arla and Kilei HaKarim are not mitzdaref, even to aser the pat that fell into b'nais in tam. Why? Zok the Rav came to Shnei Shemis Dinhu. They're two separate things. Ella imyesh b'kdera levatel tam Arla b'fnei atzman. Unless what's cooking in the pot is so strong that the taste will be able to be mevatel the taste of the Arla by itself. V'tam Kilei HaKarim b'fnei atzman, meaning that what's cooking in the pot is so strong to be able to zap out both flavors, side of the Arla and side of the Kilei HaKarim, then everything is going to be mutter. Rebbe Lezer, I remember, it's started from a nice and tam. Arla and Kilei HaKarim combine to aser mixture when it comes to nice and tam. They fall into the type of mixture in which the flavors can spread through the entire mixture and be tasted. This occurs dafka by lach belach, in a wet mixture. For example, wine that was made out of Arla and Kilei HaKarim fall into water, or where Arla fruit and Kilei HaKarim fall into a pot of food that's already being cooked. In such a case, if the flavor of the two of them together can be tasted, it's going to be aser b'nais and tam. According to Rebbe Lezer, if Arla and Kilei HaKarim both fall into a mixture of this kind, the mixture is not mutter as long as we can still taste the combined flavor of the two. Although neither the Arla wine nor the Kilei HaKarim wine can flavor the mixture by itself, since the only flavor that shaykh, since the whole nice and tam over here is only shaykh when you have both of them together, they combine to aser the mixture. Rebbe Lezer is obviously speaking of a case where the Arla and Kilei HaKarim fell into different kinds of food. For example, wine fell into water or grapes cooked with vegetables or meat. If the Arla and Kilei HaKarim wine mixed with wine that's mutter, or their grapes were cooked with min b'mina grapes, so then there's no possibility of tasting their flavor since it's all the same thing. So in this case, they're going to be subject to the next rule of the Mishnah, which is avaloi lesar, which we'll get to in a minute. Rebbe Lezer holds like Reb Shimon that different Yisurim do not combine to aser. He makes an exception only where the two combine to give, where they're nice and tam in the food. Reb Shimon, however, holds that even in this case, the two do not combine. Although we can taste the flavor of wine in the mixture, since it's not the flavor of arla by itself, or kilei karim by itself, so then this taruvis is going to be mutter. Avaloi lesar, but they do not combine to aser mixture in regard to needing 200 to 1 to nullify them, to be mevatel it. So when they fall into the kind of mixture in which their flavor does not spread through the mixture, if it's yavesh, you have arla and kilei karim, they do not combine to need 200 times more of davar hamutter to be mevatel them together. As long as there's enough to be mevatel each of them separately by 200, by a ratio of 200 to 1, then they both become batel, and it's not necessary to have 200 times more than both of them together. In cases where arla and kilei karim get mixed up with davar hamutter, if it's yavesh b'yavesh, in which each piece remains separate from the others and they're not cooked together, the asur food does not give any flavor to the davar hamutter. So mixtures of this type, the halacha is that arla and kilei karim do not become batel unless there's 200 times more of heter. In regard to this halacha, arla and kilei karim do not combine. For as long as there's 200 times more of heter, the mixture can be eaten even though we don't have 200 times more than both of them together. An example of this case is where you have a container of food made from arla and a container of food made from kilei karim that can mix up with 200 other containers of food that were made from dvarim hamutorim. So then that's the case that we would talk about. In that case, it won't be asur. Mishnah Beis. Hatruma maila esa arla va'arla esa truma. One forbidden food can sometimes help be mevatel different davar asur. Truma can help be mevatel arla, and arla can help be mevatel truma. That is, truma can join with the chulin to create a 200 to 1 majority necessary to be mevatel the arla, and the arla can join with the chulin to create the 100 to 1 ratio to be mevatel truma. Okay, so what's the case that we're talking about? So truma shenaflu l'meya. If you have a sav truma that fell into close to 100 of chulin, it fell into 99 and a half sav chulin, which is not enough to be mevatel the truma. Let's say, and afterwards 3 kavan, which is half a sav arla, fell into the chulin as well. Or shleisha kaban kilei karim, or 3 kaban of kilei karim fell in. Zuhi truma ma'alas arla v'arla karim of arla as a truma. This is the case in which the truma nullifies the arla, or the klayim, and the arla nullifies the truma. The tarubas now contains 99 and a half sav chulin, 1 sav truma, and half a sav arla, or klayim. The sav truma combines with the 99 and a half sav chulin to form a unit of now 100 and a half sav, which is enough to be mevatel the half sav arla by a margin or a ratio of 200 to 1, and the half sav arla combines with the 99 and a half sav chulin to form a unit of 100 sav, which is enough to be mevatel the truma by a margin of 100 to 1. So that's how you have that truma is ma'alas arla, v'ha'arla es ha truma. Mishnah Gimel. Ha'arla ma'alas ha'klayim v'ha'klayim es ha'arla. Similarly, we just like in the previous Mishnah, we dealt with truma being helping be mevatel arla or klayim. So this Mishnah deals with arla and klayim helping be mevatel each other. So ha'arla ma'alas ha'klayim v'ha'klayim es ha'arla. Ha'arla es ha'arla. And one kind of arla can help be mevatel another kind of arla, which would be, we're talking about over here is revai. A davar asur cannot help be mevatel another davar asur of the same isser, even in combination with something else. So arla can't be mevatel another type of arla. However, there are 2 stages associated with halach of arla, as we spoke in the Hakdama. The first 3 years of when the tree grows, its fruit is completely asur, and it's known as arla. In the 4th year, the fruit is known as revai, and has a different halacha, must be eaten in Yerushalayim with the same dinim as Ma'aser Sheni, and it's also to eat these peiros outside of Yerushalayim. So our Mishnah is teaching us that if arla fell into a davar hamutter, and then unredeemed revai, meaning you weren't paided yet, fell in, so then the revai can help be mevatel it and be matter to eat it anywhere. Meaning it will be able to help be matter to eat the revai, that it doesn't have it in a revai, that the revai itself becomes batel. Since arla and revai are prohibited by different isurim, they have shnei shemos, it's not coming from the same isur, each can help be mevatel each other. So it's not arla being mevatel arla per se, but it's a different type of arla that you have arla and revai, each one working to be mevatel the other. If the revai in the mixture can be, if you can be paided, it must be, you have to be paided, it won't be batel. However, the Mishnah is talking about a case where you can't be paided. For example, it was worth less than a shav of pruta, so it's not enough to be redeemed. Okay, so what's the case? What are we talking about over here? So arla shenaflu l'masayim. If a saw of arla fell into close to 200 saw of davar hamuter, which is not enough to be mevatel, and afterwards a saw and a tiny bit more of a different type of arla or revai fell in as well. Or a saw and a tiny bit more of kili akarim fell in, which again not enough to be mevatel. Zuhisha arla mailas haklayim, klayim as a arla, arla as a arla. This is the case in which arla helps nullify klayim, and klayim helps nullify arla, and arla helps be mevatel different types of arla as well. The saw of arla that fell in the first combines with the 199.9 saw of permitted produce to make it to a little more than 200, so that would be enough to be mevatel. Mishnah Daled. Kol ha-mechametz ha-metabel va-medamea b'truma u'b'orla b'kili akarim osir. The Mishnah now discusses a case in which truma or arla or kili akarim do not become batel, even if they mix with a large enough amount of heter. This is because when they're in this mixture, it can still be noticed, it'll still have some kind of nice and tam, let's say. So kol ha-mechametz, anything that would make something chametz, would cause it to rise. So why don't these things work to be mevatel? Because they have a very noticeable effect on this taruvis now, and they can't be considered insignificant because it's still davar chashuv, and it won't work to be mevatel. So anything that's left to rise on its own, which takes a long time to rise. So to speed up the process, certain ingredients can be added to the dough to make it rise faster. So that's a mechametz. This is usually done by adding a piece of se'or, which is dough that was left to rise for a long time until it became highly fermented. However, it can also be done by adding fermented apples or wine to the dough. The Mishnah is speaking of a case where the dough either had sourdough made from truma, or apples from arla, or wine from grapes, or either arla or kili akarim. V'metabel, or spices, or something that would give a very strong taste to the food, that falls into heter. Certain spices grow on trees and be considered as arla. Others grow as herbs and can be aser al kili akarim. Although most foods lose the tam and they become batel b'shishim, but spices can be tasted even when they're mixed in a much greater amount of food. Think about it. If you put black pepper in a bowl of chicken soup, you zicher have more than 60 times the amount of the pepper in the bowl. V'aval pikein, the pepper still has a very, very strong tam in the bowl, right? So it's going to work. So it's not going to work to be mevatel. V'amedamea bet truma, and in the case of truma, makes it meduma, which is a mixture of chulin and truma. That's also to a non-kain, which would mean that it won't be batel. Arla b'kili akarim aser, and in the case of arla and kili akarim, it makes a taruv aser for everyone, even if the amount of heter would normally be enough to be mevatel the davar aser. Since the effect of the truma, arla, or kili akarim are still noticeable, they don't become batel no matter how much heter is present in the taruvis. Now, having learned this halacha, that if you have chametz of iser or tavlin of iser that gets mixed with heter, so now the Mishnah is going to talk about a machlekes about tamei se'ar or spices, how they affect tahar food. Normally, only tamei food that's at least the size of a beya can make other food tamei. The question here is whether tamei, because the chametz could be less than the shir v'kabeya, or the spices is going to be less than a shir v'kabeya, so but it's still giving a tam to the food. So then you have you'll have an issue over here. So Beishamai Emrim af metame, Beisil Emrim lo'elam ena metame ad shehebe kabeya. Beishamai say that if the se'or, the chametz, or the tavlin that's tamei was added to a dough or to food, it makes the other food tamei even when it's smaller than the size of an egg. Beishamai hold that if se'or that was tamei was used in dough that was tahar, or if a tamei spice was used to flavor a cooked dish that was tahar, then the dough or the cooked dish becomes tamei, even if the se'or or the tavlin was less than the size of a kabeya. So just as a small amount of forbidden chametz or tavlin doesn't become batel when it has a noticeable effect on a larger pot, let's say, so too a small amount of tumah of se'or or tavlin, of chametz or tavlin, is considered significant enough to make other foods tamei because of the noticeable effect that it has on them. Beis Hill say that chametz or tavlin can never make other foods tamei unless as a shir v'kebeya, as is the halach with other ordinary food. Beis Hill hold that the shir v'kebeya needed to transmit tumah is exeres hakosov, and that was the din for all foods. The ein oichel metama parchs mikebeya loishna se'ar v'tavlin loishna shar oichlin. We're not going to be mechalik. There's no makom to be mechalik. It's exeres hakosov kacha. That's how it is, and it's not based on the significance of the food. obviously this makes for an interesting discussion because, there's something, meaning mitzad itself, meaning if you wouldn't have this Gzeres HaKos of how it would work, right? Well, it's Tameh. So then even if you put in something else, will it make it the whole thing Tameh or not? And by Chalala, how does Tavlin work to be Metameh? Let's say you would have a share of a Kibbeh of Tavlin in something, or a share of a Kibbeh. Does that automatically be Metameh the other foods? If it depends on the Madregas of Tumah. Fine. Mishnah, hey, Doistai ish kfar yasmo hoya mitalmidei beishamai. Doistai, who was from Kfar Yasmo, was the name of a place, was from the Talmidim of Beis Shammai. Now, does that mean he was from the Talmidim of Beis Shammai, or he was from Beis Shammai? I don't know. The Omar Shamati Mishamai Hazoken Shomer. He heard from Shammai Hazoken. So it sounds like he was a Talmid of Shammai. He was able to learn. He heard directly from Shammai. So he heard from Shammai Hazoken Shomer LaOlam Ina Metama Adri Hebe Kabeya, that chametz or tavlin can never make other food tamei unless it's the size of a kibbeh. So Doistai says here in Eidos that Shammai himself agreed to Shitas Beis Hillel in the previous Mishnah that the tamei of chametz and tavlin are no different from any other tamei foods, and they don't make any other foods tamei unless they're at least the shear of a kibbeh. It seems that the other Talmidim of Shammai argued with Beis Hillel because they hadn't paid close enough attention to what Shammai was saying, and they weren't aware of his opinion on the matter. Whatever the reason is why the other people didn't know that, but Doistai Ishkar Yasma had an edus that he heard from Shammai Hazaken, that's what Shammai said, Kishitas Beis Hillel, and not Kishitas Beis Shammai, the previous Mishnah. Okay, so we mentioned in the first paragraph that we're going to have a few cases of Shammai coming up throughout the Masech Zarla. Here is one of the Doistai Ishkar Yasma. He's the second person that we're mentioning from an interesting place that's coming together with Beis Shammai, saying not like what Beis Shammai said in the previous Mishnah. Okay. Mishnah Vav. V'lama omru kol ha'mechametz v'metamel v'amedamei lahachmir. We learned in Mishnah Dalet that chametz and tavlin of truma don't become bottle even in a mixture containing 100 times more chulin. So now the Mishnah is gonna continue with this halacha. So the psak of Mishnah Dalet was taken from an older halacha. So the Rav says, "Kamei ubame amru," not v'lama amru, but bame amru. K'lemar be'eze inyan amru shamachametz chulin b'sa'ar shel truma v'metabel k'deres chulin b'tam shel truma v'amedameh shama'arav v'mevar shel chulin truma yachad shenohalchem akol ha'achmer u'mishani min b'minay. Meaning, what cases were we talking about that in Mishnah Daled? What cases were the Mishnah talking about in Mishnah Daled that chametz won't be mevatel, won't become bottle, or spices won't become bottle or spices of truma or meduma? What case are we talking about? So we're talking about min b'minay. In regard to what did the Chachamim say that any truma, that the dough became chametz with chulin, or that spices a dish which is chulin, or that creates a meduma mixture of truma and chulin without any sa'ar or chametz taking place, we're always gonna be machmer. V'lama amru lahachmer. Min b'minay. They said that dafka in a case where you have chulin mixed with the same kind. Now, what does that mean? What does it mean min b'minay? Lahakalu lahachmer min b'she'enay minay. In regard to what did they say, the taruvis is to be treated sometimes lahakel and sometimes treated lahachmer. That's talking about min b'she'enay minay, not of its own kind. And the Mishnah will go on to explain what we're talking about. Lahachmer, lahakalu lahachmer. What are all these cases? What are all these halachas? What are we talking about? So, Ketzad, what's the case? Se'or shel chitim shenafel toich isas chitim. In what way is a mixture of truma and chulin of min b'minay that we're always going to be machmer if chametz got mixed into it? So, se'or shel chitim shenafel toich isas chitim. If sourdough made from truma wheat that fell into regular dough made from chulin wheat, v'yesh b'kedei lechametz, and there's enough sourdough to make the chulin dough chametz, ben sheyesh b'lalis be'echad u'meya, ben she'en b'lalis be'echad u'meya aser. So whether there's enough chulin to be mevatel the truma in a mixture of 101, or whether there's not enough chulin to be mevatel the truma in a mixture of 101 parts, meaning that there's less than 100 parts of chulin, klape the one part of truma aser, the dough is going to be aser to non-kaihanim, where the truma makes the chulin chametz. No amount of chulin can be mevatel it because the truma's effect is visible, as we mentioned in Mishnah Dalet. Ein b'lalis be'echad u'meya On the other hand, if there's not enough chulun to be mevatel the truma sourdough in a mixture of 101 parts, ben sheyesh b'kdei lechametz, ben she'en b'kdei lechametz, aser. Then whether there's enough truma to be mevatel it or not enough truma to be mevatel to make it chametz, whether there's not enough sourdough in it to make it chametz, aser, the chulun is still aser to non-kehanim. Since there's less than 100 parts of chulun to the 1 part of truma sourdough, it doesn't matter whether the truma becomes chametz or not. Truma never becomes batel in a mixture with the same kind, meaning min b'minai, unless there are 100 parts of chulin to 1 part of truma. The Taisa, when the Rav speaks over here of giving flavor, he means that the sourdough causes the dough to leaven and rise. I mean, it's lav dafka mamish or nice and tam, but it's an akuda that there's a significant change within this taruvis, within this Michael, that's going to allow it to be different, a significant change like we were talking the whole time. Bekitzer, when the truma sourdough falls into ordinary dough of the same kind, min b'mina, we always treat it according to we always go to chumrah. If we can make it chametz, we treat it that it's going to be mechametz, and it will never become batel. Because once it becomes chametz, we said, from Mishnah Dalet, then it won't become batel. If there's not enough to become chametz, we treat it as truma. And then if it needs to be trumas, then you need to have at least 100 times more to be mevatel it. So that's what the Chachamim said, that any truma that becomes chametz are always lahachmer, because if on that side that it's going to be machmetz, going to become chametz, so then that's like nice and tam, so then it's going to be also. And if it's going to be more trumadig, in a sense, that you have less than 100, so then it won't become batel either, because you need to have more chulin. So any truma that becomes chametz is always going to be treated le-chumra. Now, Mishnah Zayin. In regard to what the Chacham said, that a taruvas, a chulin, and trumas to be treated sometimes a chulin and sometimes a chumra, min b'she'ena mina. We're talking about 2 different types, 2 different minim, 2 different kinds of produce that were mixed with chulin, 2 different kinds. Ketzad, how so? In what way is a mixture of truma and chulin of different types, sometimes lahakal and sometimes lahachmer? If you have a certain kind of bean that was cooked together with lentils, and there's enough beans to give the flavors to the lentils, then if there's a nice and tam, then regardless of whether there's enough lentils to be mevatel the truma beans in 100, or whether there's not enough chulin lentils to be mevatel the truma beans, there's less than 100 parts, it's also to non-kehanim, because the flavor of the truma can be tasted throughout the entire mixture, and it's going to be also to non-kehanim no matter how much chulin there is. Because that something is batel b'meya is only when the flavor of truma is not there anymore. But if it's still there, then it's something significant, and then it's not going to be batel. Ein behem b'nais and tam, if however the truma beans do not give a flavor to the lentils, ben sheyesh behem lalis be'echad u'meya, then regardless of whether there are enough chulin lentils to be mevatel the truma beans in 101 parts, ben she'en behem lalis be'echad u'meya mutter. Meaning, as long as there's, whether you have 101, whether you don't have 101, the nakuda is that as long as there's not a nice and tam, then it's going to be mutter. So again, if however the truma beans do not give flavor to the lentils, then regardless of whether there's enough chulin to be mevatel the truma beans in 101, or whether there's not enough chulin lentils to be mevatel the truma beans in 101, mutter, this taruvis is going to be mutter to non-kehanim. The 100-to-1 ratio for being mevatel truma applies only to truma that mixes with chulin of min b'mina. When it mixes with chulin of min b'she'ena mina, the only thing that matters is whether it's nice and tam to the chulin. This is the case in which truma mixing with chulin of a min b'she'ena mina, we're going to be mekel. Okay. The 100-to-1 halacha of being mevatel truma is midrabanan, but it's nevertheless based on a pasuk. Since the pasuk that we bring the raya from, or being saimech on, discusses truma that fell into chulin of the same kind, the chacham weren't geyser on min b'she'ena mina. So it's a different thing. So it sounds like it's a big klal over here. So klal gadol, when you have 101 to be mevatel something, it's dafka min b'mina. Min b'she'ena mina, it's fine as long as there's no nice and tam. Don't stay to the Mishnah. Okay. Mishnah Ches. So shal chulin shenafel l'teich isa. If sourdough of chulin fell into chulin dough, so what's the problem? V'yesh b'kedei lechametz, and there was enough of it to make the dough chametz. V'yachar kach nafal se'or shal truma se'or shal kilei hakerem, and then afterwards sourdough of truma or klayim fell into the mixture, and there was enough of it to make the dough chametz on its own, and the two sourdoughs can make this dough chametz together. So aser, the dough is aser. Although the sourdough that fell in was mutter, it could have done the job on its own, but the sourdough aser contributed to and indeed speeded up the chametzing process, so its effect is therefore considered visible and it does not become bottle. So it's interesting because I guess when you have, I guess the nakuda of se'ar is to help it rise. So if you have one se'ar, so it takes, let's say, an hour to rise. But I guess if you have 2 times the amount of the se'ar, so maybe it'll take a half hour. I'm not a bucky in the sourdough industry yet, but after that there's mahalach, there's a certain amount that you have to deal with, that you have to make it that way. I don't know. Mishnah Tes. Se'ar shal chulin shenafel l'teich isa v'chimtza. The Mishnah, like the previous one, discusses the case of dough that was chametz by side davra aser and side davra mutter, or a sourdough that was mutter and sourdough that was aser. So the previous Mishnah discussed a case where the sourdough aser fell in before the sourdough hamutter could make a chametz. So this Mishnah discusses a case where the sourdough aser fell in after the sourdough hamutter had already made it chametz. So she'ar shal chulin shenafel teich isa v'chimtza, meaning you had heter she'ar that fell into a dough and made it chametz. And afterwards, sourdough or kilei akarim sourdough fell into the dough, and now there's enough of it to make that dough chametz on its own. Had the chulin, meaning had the chulin sourdough not already made this dough chametz, the dough is still aser because the sourdough will speed it up, and it'll still be able to help. Reb Shimon says no, it's mutter because this extra sourdough can spoil the taste of the bread made from the dough. I mean, sourdough tastes sour, but imagine it would be twice as sour as this sourdough. Mistama, in a couple of years, they're going to start advertising really sourdough, like may even taste like spoiled milk. But the point is that Reb Shimon holds that it's nice and tam lefgam, so it's not going to aser it because kolzman it's being mashbiach. And nice and tam means that it's a good flavor, but if it's nice and tam lefgam, which means that the davra asa that fell in, that substance worsens the flavor of the food, so it doesn't aser it. So in our case, once the dough has been made chametz by the chulin sourdough, the additional chametz that's going to get by the truma sourdough is not going to improve it, it's going to make it worse. So therefore, it's going to be mutter. That's the svara of Reb Shimon, why Reb Shimon holds it's going to be mutter, because we're talking here about nice and tam lefgam. Okay, Mishnah Yud. Back to the sugya of spices. Tavlin. Shnaim u'shleisha shemis mimin echad and mishleisha aser u'mitzdarfen. Spices that are aser under 2 or 3 different isurim, such as truma, arla, and asherah. They're all of one kind, meaning you have truma, pepper, arla, pepper, asherah, pepper, or mishleisha, or spices made up of 3 different kinds of ingredients, but they're all aser from the same iser, meaning you have onion, Lav dafka is onion, have a din of tavlim, klape this, but onion powder. But let's say you have onion powder, garlic powder, and black pepper, but they're all from kilei akarim, they're all from arla. So asur u'mitzdarfen all combine to aser the food being flavored. Again, the reason is because it's nice and tam over here, and it's something significant to davar chashuv that's going to be put into the dough, that's going to be put into the pot, and it's going to make it asur. Although none of the individual ingredients can flavor the food by itself, the food is aser because together it gives it a flavor. The Mishnah speaks of a case where the tastes of all 3 were similar enough that they can reinforce one another and be tasted together in the mixture. Since they can all be tasted, they don't become bottled in the mixture. Meaning the point is that there's still a stark nice and tam over here. Reb Shimon says, Shnaim u'shleisha shemis mimin echad, v'shnei minim mishem echad, einan mitzdarfen. Reb Shimon says another interesting thing. Spices that are aser under 2 or 3 different isurim, but the spices are all the same type. Meaning, you have pepper of truma or asherah, or you have pepper and garlic powder of 2 different kinds, but both from asherah, let's say, einan mitzdarfen, they do not combine to aser the food being flavored. According to Reb Shimon, only spices of the same min and the same iser combine to aser to aser. If there are different kinds or they're different isurim, they don't combine, and each one becomes bottled by itself. That is, as long as there's enough to be mavadal each ingredient by itself, each one becomes bottle by the mixture, and it can be eaten. Reb Shimon is going to go l'shitasai from Mishnah Aleph that different isurim do not combine to create another isur. Mishnah Yud Aleph. We got to go all the way to Yud Zayin. Mishnah Yud Aleph. Sa'ar shal chulin v'shal truma shenaflu l'teich isa. V'loi bezeh kedei lechametz, v'loi bezeh kedei lechametz, nitztarfu v'chimtzu. What do you do now? The Mishnah now returns to the subject of two sourdoughs that combine to make the dough chametz. So if a sourdough of chulin and a sourdough of truma fell into a dough that did not have any sourdough in it, there wasn't chametz at all. So first one and then another. There wasn't enough of the chulin to make it chametz, and there wasn't enough truma, sourdough, to make it chametz. And they combined in the dough, and they made it chametz together. So some machlekes. Rabbi Lezer says, I followed the last one. If the truma sourdough was the last one to fall in, the dough was considered to have been made chametz by the truma and maybe eaten only by the kohanim. But if it was chulin sourdough that fell in last, then the dough is considered to have been made chametz by the chulin and maybe eaten by anybody. Since the leavening process, making it chametz, did not take off until the second one fell in, the second one is considered to be the one to have made it chametz. The Chachamim say, "Bein shenafal isa batchila bein basoif lo'olam einei oitzer ad shehebe kedei lechametz." The Chachamim say that whether the sourdough of Isra fell in first or whether it fell in last, meaning chronologically it doesn't matter when it fell in. It never answers the chulin dough unless there's enough of it to make the chulin by itself. But we said that being that loy bezeh kedei lechametz, then it's never, meaning even if they two together made it chametz, but it's zevez agorim, so then we're going to, meaning that both of these sourdoughs cause it to become chametz. Zevez agorim, the halacha is the chachamim say it's mutter. And not always do we say that zevez agorim is mutter, but in this case we're saying that over here the zevez agorim is going to be mutter. Therefore, in this case, where there was not enough truma sourdough to make the dough chametz by itself, and the dough is mutter, so regardless of the order in which ways the se'or fell in, although the truma contributed to making it chametz, it was only a partial cause, and a partial cause is not enough to answer something according to the Chachamim. Although the chametz does not take place until the second one falls in, it cannot be denied as the first one also. Meaning, it doesn't take away, it doesn't subtract the fact that the first one fell in. The first one is going to do something. It may not be as active as the second one, but the second one activated it more, since there's not enough of the second one to do the job by itself. So according to the Chachamim, there's no reason to consider the second one more important than the first one. Rather, this is a case of two things working together to bring about one result. Two factors that together cause something to happen are known as zevez agorim. This one and this one cause it. The Chachamim hold that even if one of these is asur, the final result is permitted. Zevez agorim is mutter. So in our case, where the truma sourdough cannot leave the dough by itself, but only together with the chulin sourdough, which is the final result, that's when it became chametz. It's going to be mutter because it was brought about by two sourdoughs, and only one of them was asur. Since the dough itself was mutter, so the partial influence of the truma in making it chametz, it's not strong enough to cause it to become asur. However, when the sourdough of Isser is able to make the dough chametz by itself, it does asur the dough, which we mentioned in the Mishnah Ches. That's what the Mishnah meant when we said unless there's enough of it to make the dough chametz by itself. Rabbi Lezer argues on this. Rabbi Lezer says that even when you have two factors causing something that happen together, if one of them is asur, zevez agorim is asur. The only reason he's mad that the dough and the chulin falls in last is that he considers the second influence more important than the first. Meaning because that's the one that gave it the kick in the pants, so to speak. However, even in this case, he's mad only when the truma sourdough was removed before the chulin sourdough fell in. Although the truma began the chametz, since it was removed before any chametz actually took place, the contribution that it gave to the dough at large became batel. So when the chulin falls in and completes the chametz, we follow the last one and are matir the end product. But if the truma is still in the dough when the chulin falls in and it finishes the chametz, it's considered to have done so together with the truma. Rabbi Lezer therefore asks the dough because this is a case of zevez agorim, which according to Shitas Rabbi Lezer is going to be that it is asur. Mishnah Yud Beis. Here we have the second Tana of Talmidei Beis Shammai. So we had the first one, which was in Mishnah Hay, and now we have the second one in Mishnah Yud Beis. Yezer ish habira hayim mitalmidei Beis Shammai v'omar sha'altis Ram Gamliel lazokin omed b'shar hamizrach v'omar la'olam enei oitzer she'hebe k'dei lechametz. Yezer, who was an officer of the Beis HaMikdash. The word bira generally refers to the Beis HaMikdash. The Trace Yisrael brings that from the Gemara Yuma on Daf Beis. Sha'altis from Gamliel Hazoken Emid B'Shar HaMizrach. And one says from Gamliel Hazoken, who was standing at the east gate of the Beis HaMikdash, and he was asking, Bizman Beis HaMikdash Yekayim. V'Yomar, and he said that true sourdough never ashes dough unless there's enough of it to leaven the dough by itself, as the Chachamim said in the previous Mishnah. Meaning, not like Rebbe Lezer. So it comes out very interesting. The Gemara says in a lot of places, Rebbe Eliezer Shamutehu. So, Taishas in a couple of places, Nida, I believe it's the Zayin and Beis, talks about Rebbe Eliezer Shamutehu. It comes from Yerushalmi that says Rebbe Eliezer comes from Beis Shammai. So this would be the similar case to what we said before in Mishnah Hay, that he's also saying Eidos differently than what the previous Shita of Beis Shammai would be. Now, it's lav dafka that every Rebbe Lezer is going mamish b'shitas Beis Shammai, so it's not mamish a kasha. But al kopanim, we're talking about mamish a machlekes about what Beis Shammai really held over here. But if we're going to learn that Taka Rebbe Lezer, everything that he held came from Beis Shammai, so then it's Taka ha'ara. So why is he referred to as Ram Gamliel Hazaken? So whenever we refer to Ram Gamliel Hazaken, we generally give him that title to differentiate between the other Ram Gamliels. There were several heads of the Sanhedrin who were known as Ram Gamliel. The first, who was the grandson of Hillel, who became the Nasi not long after his famous grandfather passed away. He was known as Ram Gamliel Hazaken, and he lived during the time of the second Beis Mikdash, and his grandson was Ram Gamliel HaSheni. But that's the halacha that he says, Mishnah Yud Gimel. Kalim shasachan b'shemen tamei v'chaza v'sachan b'shemen tahar, oy shasachan b'shemen tahar v'chaza v'sachan b'shemen tamei, Rebbe Lezer emer acher harishan ani ba, v'chachamim emer acher ha'achrein. This would sound like punk kapoya, punk fakert, for Rebbe Lezer held in the previous halacha in Mishnah Yud Aleph. So let's clarify this, what's going on. So Kalim Shasachem B'Shem and Tameh. The Mishnah discusses a case of a leather utensil, such as a shoe, that was rubbed with oil to soften it, as was the minig in those days. So much of this oil becomes absorbed into the leather, and some of it comes out again when the keli is used and pressure is applied to it. Let's say a person starts wearing the shoe, and he starts walking on it. So in the case that the Mishnah discusses, the shoe was rubbed twice. Once with oil that was tameh, and once with oil that was tahar. The question is, which oil came out when the person wore the shoe? So kalim shasachem b'shem and tameh. If leather utensils were rubbed with tameh oil to soften them, so then it would make it tameh, which would be which liquid, meaning only midrabanan can a liquid make a keli tameh. So the tameh oil was rubbed onto the shoe, and that would make the shoe tameh. Now v'chazar v'sachem b'shem and tahar. Then after he was tovel it in the mikveh to make the keli tahar again, so they were rubbed again with oil, this time with tahar oil. So the leather utensil now has two different oils absorbed in it. The tameh oil, which was absorbed before it was immersed in the mikveh, and the tahar oil, which was absorbed after it was immersed in the mikveh. So the tameh oil that was absorbed in the shoe didn't become tahar when he was tovel in the mikveh, because the oichlim and mashkim do not become tahar in the mikveh. Only people in kalim become tahar in this way. Nevertheless, the tameh oil in the shoe does not make it tameh while it's absorbed in it, because the source of tumah that's absorbed inside something else, tumah belua, cannot transmit tumah. There's a lot of interesting cases of tumah belua. If an animal swallowed some tumah and the animal then dies, does that change the status of things? There's a few cases in Mishnayos and all this that deal with this. Kapanim, tumah belua cannot transmit tumah outwards. So now, if the oil is nivla in this shoe or in this leather pouch, so then how does it work? Oisha sachem b'shem and tahor, or the opposite. First they rubbed with tahor oil, and then after the tahor oil had dried, they rubbed it again with tameh oil, then making them tameh, and then they were tovel in the mikveh to make it tahor, and then they were used, and some of the oil came out. The question is, do we assume that this was tameh oil that came out, or do we assume that it was the tahor oil that came out? If we assume that the tameh oil came out, the shoe obviously will become tameh again from it, which is not a kasha b'chlal, but that's just how tumah v'tahor works. Rebbe Lezer emer achar rishon ani ba. I follow the first oil. The oil that was absorbed first is the one that comes out. So the Rishalmi explains that the second oil pushes out the first. That when the second oil is absorbed, it penetrates more deeply and pushes the first oil closer to the surface. So when the leather is squeezed out and some oil comes out, it's the first oil that comes out. And to me, it's just madna, because by me, I'm obviously on my limited understanding, I'm thinking that if you put something in a mikveh, then the oil should rise out. I guess it's still going to be nivla in it somewhat. So in the case where the tamei oil was absorbed first, the kelu would be tamei. In the case where the tar oil was absorbed first, the kelu would be tahar. Why? Because Rebbe says that the oil that was absorbed first, that's the one that comes out. Meaning not the second one. The Chachamim say we follow the last oil. According to the Chachamim, the oil that was absorbed first caused the leather to become largely saturated and thus unable to hold much more oil. The second oil therefore remains close to the surface, and that's the one that gets pushed out. And so if the second oil was tamei, so then the keli would be tamei. If the second was tahar, then the keli would be tahar. So interessante machlekes, right? Is this a machlekes b'metzias? Almost, it sounds like. I guess it would be hard to tell what's what. I don't know. Not clear. Mishnah Yud Daled. So or shel truma shel kilei akarim shenaflu teich isa. If sourdough of truma and sourdough of kilei akarim fell into a isa that was mutter, and neither of the isurim that fell in had enough to make a chametz, when it's darfu v'chimtu, they combined and made it chametz together. Also lazarim, the dough was also to be eaten by non-kehanim, because both the truma sourdough and the kilei akarim sourdough are also to them. Mutter kehanim, but it's mutter kehanim from truma is mutter, since only the kilei akarim is also to them, and it can't make the dough chametz by itself. The dough is going to be permitted to them. A kohen may eat this dough because truma is mutter to them, but the kilei akarim part is still also to them. There's no one that has a heter to eat kilei akarim. But the zach is that the Mishnah said that ein b'kilei akarim k'dei lahachmetz. There wasn't enough of the klaim to make a chametz, so it therefore becomes batel. Following the shittas hachacham that we mentioned in the Mishnah Yud Aleph, that when you have two sourdoughs that are needed to make it chametz, and only one of them is also, we say zev zagorim is going to be mutter. Reb Shimon says that both of them are mutter. Since the two pieces of se'or are not forbidden under the same isser, they don't combine it to make it also, because we're talking about an isser of kilei akarim, we're also talking about an isser of Arla. Reb Shimon is going l'shitase from Mishnah Aleph and Mishnah Yud, that even two substances that are the same do not combine to aser if they are forbidden by different isurim, meaning it almost makes it as if it's not min b'minay anymore. Mishnah Tezvav. Tavlin shel truma shel kilei akarim shenaflu b'kdera. If spices of truma and kilei akarim fell into a pot of food, lo be'elu k'dei l'tabel v'lo be'elu k'dei l'tabel, and there wasn't enough truma spices and there wasn't enough kilei akarim spices to spice the food on their own, when starfu v'tiblu, but they both combined and gave flavor to the food together. The flavors were similar enough so that they reinforced each other and combined the flavor to the food. Also lazarim. The food is going to be also to zarim v'mutter l'kehanim. It's going to be mutter to kehanim who are mutter to eat truma, since both truma and kilei akarim are also to non-kehanim. So then for Yisrael, there's going to be two Yisurim working against them, so they won't be able to eat it. So they combine to aser the food to a non-kohen. But since truma is mutter to kehanim, the only issur that we're talking about over here is kilei akarim, and kilei akarim by itself, doesn't have enough in it to make it osir, so then it's going to be mutter to be eaten by a kohen. Reb Shimon again, Reb Shimon matter, let's like kehanim. Reb Shimon's matter to both non-kehanim and to kehanim, because he holds the two isurim do not combine to create one isser. Mishnah Tez Zayin. Chaticha shel kotche kotchem v'shel pigel v'shel noisor shen is bashlo machatichos also lezorim umuter lakehanim. The Mishnah is going to talk about a similar case. We're just talking about kotchem. The meat of most karbanos is either eaten by kehanim or by the person bringing the korban and his family or his guests or whatever it is, with only a small amount of it being burnt on the mizbeach. However, certain things can happen to a korban that aser the meat from being eaten. If a korban is made with the kavana of eating it shaloi bizmanoi, or with the intention of the kavana of burning the emurim shaloi bizmanoi, the entire korban becomes no good, and it's called pigel. And the meat is aser, and there's a chiv kars if you eat it. There's a kars, the chiv kars if you eat it, and the meat may not be eaten. Also, the meat of a korban that was good, that was left over beyond the time allowed for eating it, becomes aser, and it's called noiser. Like pigel, noiser may not be eaten under the penalty of kares. The Mishnah discusses the case of meat of a good korban that was cooked together with pigel, noiser, and chulin. So chaticha shel kotche kotchim, a piece of kotche kotchim either an oila, either a chatas or an osham, that may be eaten only by kohanim, right? Because kachim kalim shlom and toida may be eaten by even non-kohanim. So shenis bashla machaticha v'shel pigul v'shel noiser, and a piece of pigul or noiser, which is also even to a kohen. Shenis bashla machatichas, they were cooked together pieces of chulin meat, and there was enough chulin meat to be mevatel kachim or the pigul and noiser, but not enough to be mevatel both of them together. The meat of a carbon is like truma, and you need 100 times the amount to be mevatel it. So also lazorim, this taruvis is going to be also to non-kohanim, because kachim and pigul and noiser all are also to non-kohanim, so they're all going to gang up together to asa the mixture. Meaning, since the kachim, pigul, and noiser are all the same iser, it's all meat, they combine to asa the mixture, even though they're from different isurim. But because it's all meat, so it's all going to go together. Or mutter kohanim, but it's mutter for kohanim because they're allowed to eat kachim, but other people are not allowed to eat. Reb Shimon matel azar kohanim. Reb Shimon holds that Reb Shimon holds the shitasa throughout that again that it's going to be mutter to non-kohanim and to kohanim. So according to Reb Shimon, the dvar masurim over here do not combine to aser an entire mixture. Okay, Mishnah Yud Zayin, the final Mishnah of our parak, Mishnah 17. Basar kachem kachim of basar kachim kalim. If meat of kachim and meat of kachim kalim, shenis bashlo and basar hataiva, neither of which may be eaten by a person who's tameh, were cooked together, meaning some kind of kachim was cooked together in basar taiva with regular, ordinary meat, chulin meat, which may be eaten even by someone who's tameh, even though there's enough chulin meat, and there is enough chulin meat in this taruvis to be mevatel either the kachim or the kachim kalim, but not enough to be mevatel both of them together. Asur latmeim umurta lataharim. This mixture is going to be also to people who are tameh because the kachim and kachim kalim combine to add to the mixture to a person who's tameh. Umurta lataharim, but it's going to be mutter to people who are tahar, even to non-kohanim. Since the kachim kalim meat is going to be mutter to someone who's not a kohen, and as long as he's tahar, and there's enough chulin meat in the mixture to be mevatel the kachim meat by itself, it does not aser the meat to them ad kan perik beis of Arla.